Many years ago, in the small, serene village of Oma, there lived a young girl named Kamto. Kamto's life began with tragedy. Her mother passed away shortly after giving birth to her due to complications. Her father, Emeka, remarried when Kamto was just 4 years old, hoping to rebuild his family with his new wife, Ego. At first, Ego was kind and nurturing. She treated Kamto like her own child until she had a daughter of her own, MMA. Kamto was overjoyed at the idea of being a big sister and did everything she could to care for MMA. However, Ego's attitude changed. She kept Kamto away from MMA, constantly reminding her that she had no mother and treating her as an outsider in her own home. When Kamto complained to her father, Emeka, he would sigh in frustration. Ego had grown beyond his control, and though his heart ached for Kamto, he felt powerless. Years passed, and Kamto grew into a beautiful young woman, but so did the cruelty she endured. Ego assigned Kamto all the household chores, fetching firewood from the farm, carrying heavy pots of water from the stream, and cooking meals. Meanwhile, MMA stayed home, pampered and spoiled with the finest things Ego could afford. The relentless mistreatment weighed heavily on Emeka. He regretted remarrying and wished he could change Kamto's fate. Over time, his worries turned into severe health issues, and eventually, he succumbed to high blood pressure and died. Kamto was left orphaned, surrounded by people who treated her as nothing more than a servant. Far away from Oma, the Prince of Agu, Caleb had spent most of his life studying abroad. From the age of 6, he had been sent away for primary, secondary, and tertiary education. Now a man, it was time for him to return home and fulfill a vital tradition, choosing a wife. The king entrusted his secretary, Ife, to select 6 of the most beautiful maidens from the village to present to the prince upon his return. Among the chosen were MMA, Kamto, and 4 other young women. The news spread quickly through the village, and the maidens began to prepare. Each one hoped to capture the prince's attention and become the next queen. Ego saw this as an opportunity for MMA. She spared no expense in pampering her daughter, buying expensive skincare products and ensuring she followed strict beauty routines. Ma's skin glowed, soft as silk, and she often admired herself in the mirror. Meanwhile, Kamto was subjected to even harsher treatment. Ego doubled her workload, ensuring she was too tired to focus on her appearance. She was only allowed to bathe every 2 days, leaving her looking unkempt and frail. Ego wanted Kamto to be rejected outright by the prince. One day, as Kamto carried a heavy basket of firewood through the village, Ugo, a kind-hearted neighbor, stopped her. Ugo had seen the way Ego and MMA treated Kamto. Kamto, Ugo said gently, taking the basket from her hands. You deserve better than this. Kamto's eyes filled with tears. But what can I do? They are my family, and I have nowhere else to go. Ugo shook her head in frustration. Later that evening, she confronted Ego and MMA directly. What you're doing to Kamto is cruel and unacceptable. Life is unpredictable, and the future is a circle. You don't know what lies ahead for this girl. Her destiny may shine brighter than anything you can imagine. Ego scoffed. She's nothing but a burden. My daughter is the one destined for greatness. But Ugo's words lingered in the air, unsettling MMA more than she cared to admit. 2 months passed, and the prince finally returned to Agu. The entire village buzzed with excitement as the 6 chosen maidens gathered at the palace. Each one had dressed in her finest attire, hoping to leave a lasting impression. Kamto stood at the edge of the group, her simple dress and weary face contrasting sharply with Ma's radiant appearance. Yet, when the prince entered the room, his eyes swept over the group and stopped on Kamto. Intrigued by her quiet strength, he asked her to step forward. What is your name? He asked, his voice gentle. Kamto, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The prince studied her for a moment, then smiled. Sometimes, beauty is more than what meets the eye. As the selection process began, the prince asked each maiden questions to understand their character. Kamto's humility and resilience shone through in her answers, leaving a deep impression on him. Though MMA flaunted her beauty and tried to captivate the prince with flattery, her efforts seemed to fall flat. The evening before the chosen maidens were to move into the palace, Kamto sat in the quiet corner of her room, her hands folded tightly as she whispered a heartfelt prayer. Tears streamed down her cheeks, pooling on the floor. "Oh Lord," she began, her voice trembling, "I commit every mother into your hands, especially those who are pregnant. May they live to care for their children. Don't let anyone else suffer the way I have. Keep them alive to raise their children with love, and may their children not end up like me. No father, no mother, no real family. Just me and my pain. If it's your will, please guide my steps as I move into the palace tomorrow." Her sobs grew louder, echoing through the empty house. After a long moment, she whispered, "Let your will be done." The day finally came, and the selected maidens were to leave for the palace. MMA was buzzing with excitement, her room filled with trunks of neatly folded dresses, sparkling jewelry, and various beauty products. Ivy hovered over her, ensuring every item was packed perfectly. Kamto, however, had nothing to pack. She sat on her bed, staring at her worn dress, the only one she owned. Her only solace was that leaving the house, even for a short time, meant freedom from endless chores and humiliation. Determined to leave as quickly as possible, Kamto stepped out, ready to join the group headed to the palace. But ego blocked her path. "Where do you think you're going?" Ivy demanded, her eyes narrowing. "To the palace, like the others," Kamto replied softly. Ego's slap came so fast that Kamto staggered backwards, clutching her face in shock. "You ungrateful girl. You want to walk into the palace dressed like that and make people think I'm a terrible stepmother." Kamto's voice trembled as she spoke. "But it's the truth. I've only ever had this one dress, and you never cared." Ivy's anger boiled over. "Don't you dare speak to me like that. Your lazy, useless mother left you to me, and now you want to shame me. You will stay here. MMA will tell them you refused to join because you said the king, the prince, and the elders can all go to hell." MMA, standing by with a smug smile, added, "Oh, poor Kamto. Next time, try to have a mother who can protect you." She then carried her packed trunks and walked out proudly, leaving Kamto paralyzed with anger and despair. Kamto stood in the middle of the courtyard, her mind racing. For the first time, she felt a deep, burning anger that threatened to consume her. Her only escape from this life had been cruelly snatched away. The thought of ending it all crossed her mind, but as she looked around, there was nothing she could use to carry out such a dark impulse. Just then, Ugo appeared. She had been walking past when she heard raised voices. Noticing Kamto's distressed state, she hurried over. "Kamto, what happened?" Ugo asked, her voice full of concern. Before Kamto could answer, Ego interjected with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Nothing happened. Kamto was just being stubborn as usual." Ugo wasn't fooled. She looked at Kamto, who was visibly shaking, her tear-streaked face betraying her emotions. Ugo turned back to Ego. "I know what you've done to this girl. It's despicable, and it will not end well for you." Ego sneered. "You don't know what you're talking about, Ugo. Worry about your own affairs." Ugo ignored her and placed a comforting hand on Kamto's shoulder. "Kamto, don't let them break you. The world may seem cruel now, but your story isn't over. Come with me." Before Ego could protest, Ugo guided Kamto away from the house. They walked in silence until they reached Ugo's home. Inside Ugo's modest but warm house, she prepared food for Kamto, who hadn't eaten all day. As Kamto ate, she finally let her emotions spill out. "I was supposed to leave today, Ugo," Kamto said, her voice heavy with despair. "For the first time, I thought I could escape. But they've taken even that from me. I don't think I can go on anymore." Ugo knelt beside her, holding her hands. "Listen to me, Kamto. The palace hasn't forgotten you. This isn't the end. Sometimes, when the world closes one door, it opens another. You're stronger than you know." Kamto shook her head. "How can I be strong when I have nothing?" "You have more than you think," Ugo said firmly. "And you have me. I'll make sure you get to that palace tomorrow, no matter what ego or MMA say. You deserve to be there just as much as anyone else." The next day would bring its own challenges, but for the first time in a long time, Kamto felt a glimmer of hope. As the sun set over Agu, she prayed silently once more, her heart pleading for a chance to change her destiny. The sun had barely risen when Ugo stormed into Ego's house. She found Kamto sitting on the floor, still wearing her worn dress, her eyes dull with exhaustion. Ugo's heart clenched at the sight. "Kamto, why are you still here? The other girls are already at the palace," Ugo said sharply. Kamto looked up, her voice trembling as she replied, "Stepmother said I couldn't go. She said I'd embarrass her and Nara. She told me to sit here and not move." Ugo's expression darkened as Kamto continued. "She makes me work from morning till night with barely any food. I bathe only once every 2 days because she says I'm not worth the water. And this is the best dress I have." At that moment, Ego walked into the room, her face a mixture of annoyance and defiance. Ugo turned to her, fury burning in her eyes. "Where is your conscience, Ego?" Ugo demanded. "You were supposed to be this girl's protector after her mother died. Instead, you've turned her life into a nightmare. How do you sleep at night knowing someone under your roof hasn't eaten properly or bathed in days? Is this how you repay her father's trust?" Ego crossed her arms, unaffected. "She's not my responsibility. My daughter is my priority, and Kamto is nothing to me." Kamto, tears streaming down her face, whispered, "Aunt Ugo, I don't want to live anymore. Please, tell me how to end it all. I can't bear this life." "Don't you dare say that again," Ugo exclaimed, kneeling beside her. "You are a child of destiny, Kamto. No matter what ego or MMA try to do, you will fulfill your purpose. You just need to stay strong." Turning to Ego, Ugo's voice hardened. "If you don't let Kamto go to the palace right now, I will personally report you to the king. You and your daughter will be evicted from this village, and you'll both face severe punishment." Caught off guard, Ego hesitated. Seeing no way out, she relented, waving Kamto away with a dismissive gesture. "Fine, take her, but don't come crying to me when she embarrasses herself at the palace," Ego sneered. Ugo took Kamto to her house, where she insisted on giving her a thorough bath. She handed Kamto a few of her daughter's clothes, simple yet clean and presentable. "Thank you so much," Kamto said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." "You don't need to repay me, child," Ugo said gently. "Just promise me one thing, never lose faith in yourself." Arrived at the palace, the gates had already been shut. She knocked hesitantly, her heart pounding in her chest. The gatekeeper opened the door slightly, eyeing her suspiciously. "Who are you, and why are you so late?" "Please," Kamto pleaded, her voice breaking. "My stepmother tried to stop me, but someone helped me get here. Don't send me away. I have nowhere else to go." The gatekeeper frowned. "The king already met with the other girls. If I let you in now without permission, I'll be punished." He hesitated for a moment before saying, "Wait here. I'll speak to the king." The gatekeeper returned shortly, a surprised look on his face. "You're lucky. The king said the group wasn't complete, so you're allowed to join them. Follow me." Kamto's heart swelled with relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Inside the palace, the king had arranged for the girls to share rooms, 2 in each. Kamto was paired with Zara, one of the kinder maidens. For the first time, Kamto felt a small sense of peace. The room was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold, harsh life she had left behind. "Welcome," Zara said with a smile as Kamto entered. "I hope we can be good friends." Kamto nodded, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you. It's been so long since I felt at home anywhere." That evening, the king called a meeting for the maidens to introduce themselves. One by one, they stepped forward. MMA, Zara, Amara, and finally Kamto. Each shared a little about their lives and aspirations, though Kamto spoke with quiet humility, careful not to draw too much attention. What none of the girls knew was that the king had secretly installed cameras in their rooms and key locations around the palace. He wanted to observe the true characters, unfiltered by rehearsed words or performances. As Kamto settled into her new life, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. The palace was a world she had never imagined, filled with both promise and mystery. For now, she could only hope that her destiny would lead her to something brighter. The second week in the palace brought with it both excitement and tension. While Kamto continued to thrive with her natural humility and hard-working nature, the others, especially MMA, began showing the true colors. Kamto had quickly found her place among the kitchen staff, offering to help with cooking and cleaning whenever she had free time. It reminded her of her days at home, but this time, she wasn't being forced. She did it out of joy. The palace maids adored her and often whispered that if she wasn't chosen as the prince's bride, she deserved a permanent place among them. Meanwhile, Ma's envy towards Kamto grew. Seeing Kamto's quiet diligence and the positive attention she received only fueled her hatred. She decided it was time to ensure Kamto's removal from the palace. Late one evening, MMA met with her mother, Ego, outside the palace gates. Ego handed her a small charm wrapped in a silk cloth and a handwritten note. "This will work if you do exactly as I instructed," Ego said firmly. "Rub it on your tongue tomorrow morning before you greet the prince. He won't be able to resist you." MMA smirked, clutching the charm. "Don't worry, mother, by the end of this week, I'll be Agu's queen." The next morning, MMA followed her mother's instructions. She approached the prince's chambers, her confidence bolstered by the charm. "Good morning, my prince," she said sweetly. The prince, who had just returned to the palace from abroad, looked up at her. His demeanor shifted almost instantly, his eyes clouding as though he were in a trance. From that moment, MMA began to act as if she were already queen, issuing commands and belittling the other maidens. Kamto avoided the drama, keeping her focus on her tasks. She had no interest in competing for the prince's attention. Instead, she spent her time talking to the chief palace guard, who had become her closest confidant. One evening, while they sat under a tree in the palace garden, Kamto shared her story. "I've lived a hard life," she said, her voice soft but steady. "My stepmother did everything she could to break me, but I survived. Being here feels like a chance to start over, even if I'm just a maid." He listened intently, his heart aching for her. "You're too good for this place, Kamto. If I had the means, I'd marry you and give you the life you deserve." Kamto smiled warmly. "You don't need to be rich for me to accept you. If you asked me to marry you, I would." He blinked in surprise. "Are you serious?" "Yes," Kamto replied without hesitation. "I like you. You're hardworking, loyal, and kind. Those are the qualities that matter most in a husband. Together, we could leave this palace, and build a future. His face lit up. You don't know how much that means to me, Kamto. But are you sure this isn't about escaping your stepmother? Kamto shook her head. No. I'd never treat marriage lightly. My decision is based on how I feel about you, not where I come from. As the days passed, the other maidens noticed how close Kamto and Palace Guard had become. MMA, in particular, was furious. She couldn't understand why Kamto seemed content while the rest of them were embroiled in a competition for the prince's favor. One evening, while Kamto was helping in the kitchen, MMA cornered her. Why are you even here? MMA sneered. You clearly don't care about the prince. What's your plan, Kamto? To marry a servant. Kamto met her gaze calmly. I'm here because it's my duty. And yes, if I marry a servant, it's because I value character over wealth. MMA scoffed. Well, don't get too comfortable. The prince will never notice someone like you. Kamto simply smiled. That's fine. I'm not here to be noticed. What MMA didn't know was that the prince, though enchanted by the charm, was secretly observing all the maidens through the cameras installed by his father. He noticed Kamto's kindness, her hard work, and how she treated everyone with respect, from the maids to the guards. One evening, he approached his father, the king. Father, he began, I've been watching the maidens closely. There's one who stands out, not for her beauty or her ambition, but for her heart. The king smiled knowingly. And who is this maiden? Her name is Kamto, the prince said. But something about her makes me wonder if she even wants to be here. As MMA grew more confident in her position, the charm began to affect not just the prince but also the palace staff. Chaos ensued as everyone began acting strangely, except for Kamto. Her lack of interest in the competition kept her grounded, and her calm demeanor made her a refuge for those who needed clarity. Kamto noticed the changes and confided in her friend. Something isn't right. Everyone is acting so strange, except us. Do you think it's a coincidence? The palace guard frowned. I don't believe in coincidences. But be careful, Kamto. If someone's behind this, they won't be happy if you figure it out. Kamto nodded, determination lighting her eyes. I won't let whatever's happening destroy this palace, or my chance to finally find peace. The storm brewing within the palace walls was far from over, but Kamto was ready to face it head-on, even if it meant confronting MMA and her stepmother's schemes. Later that evening, Kamto sat quietly in her room, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She had hoped the king would grant her request to leave the competition and join the maids, but his refusal left her trapped in a situation that felt increasingly dangerous. Zara, her roommate, noticed her pensive state. Kamto, Zara began gently, what's troubling you? Kamto sighed. I just don't belong here, Zara. This whole competition is turning into a war, and I'm not cut out for it. I wish the king had let me leave. Zara placed a reassuring hand on Kamto's shoulder. Don't sell yourself short. You're the only one here who hasn't lost her head trying to impress the prince. That says a lot about your character. Kamto smiled faintly. Thank you, Zara. I just hope this all ends soon. Unbeknownst to Kamto, the king was devising a plan. After receiving reports of Ivy sneaking into the palace to meet with MMA and seeing their conversation on the hidden cameras, the king realized just how deep the schemes ran. He summoned his most trusted advisors and the chief palace guard to his chambers for a private meeting. This competition has revealed more than just who is fit to be queen, the king began. It has exposed the true nature of some of these women and their families. We must handle this carefully to protect the integrity of the royal family. The palace guard stepped forward. Your Majesty, if I may speak freely, Kamto is the only one who has shown humility and kindness. She even volunteered to leave the competition because she felt unworthy. That speaks volumes about her character. The king nodded thoughtfully. I've noticed the same. But we must tread cautiously. MMA and her mother, Ego, are dangerous. We need proof of their treachery that will leave no room for denial. The king then instructed the guard to keep a close eye on MMA and Ego. I want to know their every move, he said. And when the time comes, we'll expose them for who they truly are. Meanwhile, MMA was reveling in her perceived victory. The charm's effects on the prince had emboldened her, and she carried herself as though she were already queen. She barked orders at the other maidens, flaunted her supposed intimacy with the prince, and even began discussing plans to redecorate the palace once she officially took the throne. One evening, as kamto passed by the garden, she overheard MMA speaking with her mother, Ego. She ducked behind a hedge and listened. Mama, everything is falling into place, MMA said with a smug grin. The prince can't resist me, and once I'm queen, kamto will regret ever setting foot in this palace. She'll be my personal maid, scrubbing floors, and fetching my meals. Ego laughed. Good. A trap set is a trap caught. Kamto has no idea what's coming. Kamto's stomach churned with anger and fear, but she stayed quiet, determined not to be seen. She had to find a way to warn the king without putting herself in danger. While the charm kept the prince under its influence, cracks began to form. He found himself drawn to kamto in ways he couldn't explain. Her simple kindness, her refusal to engage in the chaos, and her humility stood in stark contrast to Nara's overbearing presence. One afternoon, he found kamto in the kitchen, helping the maids prepare a meal. Kamto, he said softly, startling her. She turned, quickly wiping her hands on her apron. Your Highness, she said, bowing her head. You're not like the others, the prince said, studying her intently. Why are you here? Kamto hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I'm here because I was chosen, but I don't believe I belong. I'm just a poor orphan trying to find my place in the world. The prince frowned. You sell yourself short. Kindness and humility are rare traits, especially here. Don't underestimate your worth. Kamto felt her cheeks flush. Thank you, Your Highness. That means more than you know. 2 days remained in the competition, and kamto was determined to leave with her dignity intact. Despite her mounting exhaustion, she couldn't let herself break. She clung to the hope that the chief guard would deliver her plea to the king. That evening, after a long day of avoiding Ma's provocations, kamto found her friend the palace guard outside near the garden. His reassuring smile gave her a glimmer of hope. Hi, kamto began, her voice trembling. Have you spoken to the king about my request? I have, he said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. The king didn't say much, but I know he's considering it. Just trust me, kamto. Things will work out. Kamto nodded, though her heart was still heavy. Thank you for being a friend. You've been the only one who's shown me kindness here. The next morning, the palace buzzed with anticipation. The prince had called for a meeting to make a special announcement. The maidens gathered in the grand hall, each of them standing nervously before the king and the prince. The prince cleared his throat, his voice echoing through the hall. I want to thank you all for being part of this journey. It hasn't been easy, but it has revealed much about each of you. After careful thought, I have made my decision. The woman who will be by my side is... The prince paused, looking around the room. MMA. Gasps filled the hall, though kamto remained silent. She had expected this. The king, however, didn't seem pleased. He leaned toward the prince, speaking in a low, firm tone. Are you sure about this, son? Ma's actions have been questionable. The prince, enchanted by the charm, nodded confidently. Yes, father. She's the one I've chosen." The king frowned but said nothing further. Kamto knew her time in the palace was coming to an end. That evening, she sought out the palace guard again. "It's over now," she said softly. "The prince has made his choice. Please, remind the king of my request to stay as a maid. I'll work hard. I just don't want to go back home." The palace guard sighed. "I've already spoken to him once, Kamto, but I'll do it again. You deserve better than what you've been through." "Thank you," Kamto whispered, her voice heavy with emotion. Meanwhile, MMA had taken her supposed victory to heart. She strutted through the palace, ordering the maids around and speaking down to Kamto and Zara. "You two should start preparing to leave," she sneered. "Your little dreams of becoming queen are over. I'll make sure to send you an invitation to the royal wedding." Zara rolled her eyes, muttering under her breath. Kamto, ever patient, simply walked away, unwilling to engage. But her calm demeanor only fueled Ma's anger. "Coward," MMA called after her. "Run away like you always do." Kamto paused but didn't turn back. She knew better than to stoop to Ma's level. The following day, the palace guard approached Kamto with a wide smile. "Kamto, the king wants to see you." Kamto's heart raced as she followed Caleb to the king's chambers. When she entered, the king was seated on his throne, his expression kind yet firm. "Kamto," he began, "Caleb has spoken highly of you, and I've seen your actions for myself. You are humble, hardworking, and kind, all qualities of a true queen." Kamto's eyes widened. "Your Majesty, I'm honored, but I'm not fit to be queen. I've only come to ask for a chance to work here as a maid." The king smiled. "Your humility is exactly why you are fit. However, I respect your wish. You will remain here in the palace, not as a competitor, but as a valued member of my staff." Tears streamed down Kamto's face. "Thank you, Your Majesty. Thank you so much." That night, the prince couldn't sleep. Thoughts of Kamto kept intruding, and the charm's effects began to wane. He remembered her gentle nature, her resilience, and her unwavering kindness. The next morning, he went to the king. "Father," he said, his voice uncertain, "I think I may have made a mistake." The king raised an eyebrow. "What kind of mistake?" "I can't stop thinking about Kamto," the prince admitted. "She's unlike anyone I've ever met." The king smiled knowingly. "Then perhaps it's time you start thinking with your heart instead of relying on others' influence." As the final day approached, Ma's arrogance reached its peak. But her world came crashing down when the king summoned her to his chambers. "MMA," he said sternly, "your behavior and the actions of your mother have been brought to my attention. You used deceit to win my son's favor, and that cannot be forgiven." MMA tried to protest, but the evidence was undeniable. The charm, the scheming, and her mother's interference were all laid bare. "You are hereby banished from Agu," the king declared. "Guards, escort her out." As MMA was dragged from the palace, Kamto stood silently, watching as justice unfolded. With MMA gone, the prince approached Kamto in the garden. "Kamto," he said softly, "I've been a fool. I let myself be blinded by others when the person I should have been paying attention to was right in front of me." Kamto looked at him, unsure of what to say. "Will you give me a chance to prove myself?" the prince asked, his voice earnest. Kamto smiled faintly. "I don't know, Your Highness. Let's see what time reveals." As the sun set over the palace, Kamto felt a flicker of hope for a future she never thought possible. The grand day had arrived. The entire village gathered at the palace, excitement filling the air as they awaited the announcement of the future Queen of Agu. It was a rare occasion, one that united everyone in curiosity and celebration. Kamto stood quietly among the remaining 3 maidens, her heart steady and her expectations low. She was dressed simply, in a modest blouse and skirt, a gift from a kind palace cook, adorer. Unlike Zara, who wore elaborate gowns that glittered in the sun, Kamto had no desire to compete. All she wanted was to secure her role as a maid and finally build a life of her own. The king addressed the crowd, his voice deep and commanding. My people, today marks the culmination of an important tradition in Agu. 6 maidens began this journey, and 3 remain. As is customary, the prince will declare his choice before all of you. But first, allow me to introduce my son. The crowd erupted into applause, eager to see their future king. You all know, the king continued, that my son, the Prince of Agu, left this land at the age of 6 after the death of my beloved wife. Many of you have not seen him since his return. Today, it is my honor to present him to you. With a sweeping gesture, the king announced, Behold, Kalab, the Prince of Agu. The audience fell silent as Aiden stepped forward. Gasps of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Kamto, Zara, froze in shock, their eyes fixed on the man they had all known as the chief palace guard. Kamto's mind raced as the realization hit her. Caleb is the prince. She glanced at him, no, at Aiden *, who now stood tall and regal before his people, his uniform replaced by royal attire. Kalab's gaze swept across the crowd before settling on Kamto. He smiled, his warmth reaching her even in her bewilderment. My people, he began, his voice steady, what you see today is the result of my father's wisdom and vision. Disguising myself as the chief palace guard allowed me to observe the true character of those competing for the title of queen. It was not an easy task, but it has brought me the greatest gift any man could ask for. The crowd murmured in excitement as Caleb continued. The woman I have chosen to stand by my side is not only kind and humble but also selfless and hardworking. She is the embodiment of grace and strength. Turning to Kamto, he extended his hand. Kamto, you are my choice. Will you be my queen? Kamto's knees felt weak, her emotions overwhelming her. Tears filled her eyes as she stared at Caleb. Me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Yes, you, Caleb said, stepping closer to her. You've shown me the kind of woman I need by my side. You are everything I've ever wanted, and more. Kamto hesitated, still processing everything. But I'm not worthy of this, she said. I never expected. Caleb gently interrupted, taking her hand. You are worthy, Kamto. You've proven it every day. The choice is yours, but know that I choose you. The crowd erupted in cheers as Kamto, still trembling, nodded. Yes, Your Highness. Months passed, and Kamto adjusted to her new life as the future Queen of Agu. Her relationship with Caleb blossomed, built on mutual respect and genuine love. She used her new position to advocate for the less privileged, ensuring that no one endured the hardships she once faced. Meanwhile, MMA discovered she was pregnant, only to learn that the man she thought was the prince was an actor hired by the king to test the maiden's sincerity. Stripped of her pride, she faced the harsh reality of raising her child alone. The story of Kamto and Caleb spread throughout Agu, teaching an important lesson. True character shines brightest in adversity. It is not beauty or wealth that defines worth, but kindness, humility, and integrity. As for Kamto, she remained an example of how life can change for the better when one stays true to oneself, proving that even the humblest beginnings can lead to greatness. Thank you for watching. Please support me by subscribing to this channel, sharing the story, and giving a big thumbs up if you enjoy it. Goodbye and see you on the next one.